What happens when the justice system goes too far? She was just a black woman walking home with groceries. But in a flash, the cops made their move and fired. But seconds later, something unexpected happened. Her son, a Delta Force legend, showed up, and everything changed in a way no one could have predicted.
Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more shocking real stories.
The street was quiet, too quiet for a bustling downtown city like Atlanta. The only sounds that broke the stillness were the soft hums of air conditioning units and the occasional car rolling by. Tasha Williams, 32, walked briskly down the sidewalk, a purse dangling loosely from her shoulder. She had just finished a long day at work, a legal assistant at a small firm. Her heels clicked against the pavement with purpose. She wasn't in a rush, but she wasn't about to slow down either. It was late, and she wanted to get home before the sun completely set. Her black leather jacket rustled slightly as she passed the corner of an intersection. But then, she heard it, a car screeching to a halt behind her. Tasha barely turned around before two police officers jumped out, one of them shouting, "Hey, stay where you are." Her heart skipped a beat. "Can I help you?" she asked, already feeling the shift in energy. She had heard enough about traffic stops gone wrong, enough about being a black woman in a world full of assumptions, but it wasn't like she had anything to hide. "We need to talk," one of the officers said, his tone hostile and commanding. "Officer Barton." "About what?" Tasha asked, trying to keep her voice steady. She had dealt with plenty of rude officers before. "Where are you coming from?" Barton asked, taking a step forward too close. His partner, Officer Harris, stood a few paces behind, eyeing Tasha like she was a threat. "None of your business," Tasha said, her tone shifting. There was no reason for this. She wasn't breaking any laws. "I'm just trying to get home." "Turn around." Hands on the hood. Tasha didn't move. "For what?" Barton's hand twitched near his holster. "For your attitude. You think you can walk around here acting like you're untouchable?" Her heart pounded now. "I didn't do anything wrong." He didn't wait for her response. In a flash, Barton grabbed her arm and twisted it behind her, forcing her toward the hood of the car. Tasha fought back, spinning away from him, pulling herself free. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she yelled. Before she could react any further, Barton pulled out his taser, aiming it at her. "Stop resisting," he shouted. The sound of the taser charging up was deafening. Tasha's chest tightened. She had seen the videos. She knew what could happen. Before she could move again, a sharp bang echoed through the air. Her legs went weak, and she dropped to the ground. The pain was instant, intense. She could feel the heat searing through her chest. The world blurred. Her vision spun. "Don't move," Barton screamed. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She felt the warmth spreading from her wound, her hands trembling as she tried to press them against her side. Tasha's mind raced. She had been shot. Barton shouted, his eyes wide with panic. "What the hell did we just do?" Harris looked down at Tasha, a mix of confusion and fear in his expression. "I don't know, man. She wasn't resisting." "You don't just shoot someone." Barton yelled. Tasha's vision darkened as her body trembled. She was slipping fast. But just before everything went black, a sound broke through her fading consciousness. A car, a large black SUV, screeching to a halt. Tasha's eyes flickered open just enough to see a shadow dart out of the vehicle. A man, tall, powerful, with military precision, rushed toward her. Elijah Collins, her son. The man who had served in the U.S. Army's Delta Force for nearly 2 years. He had a reputation for being methodical, efficient, and unwavering in his focus. And now, he was standing over her. "What the hell happened?" Elijah barked, kneeling down beside her, his hands gently checking her wound. His eyes flicked to the officers. "Get the hell away from her," he shouted at Barton and Harris. Barton stepped back, hands raised in surrender, his gun still holstered but shaking in his grip. Harris stood frozen, not knowing how to respond. Elijah didn't wait for their answers. His military training took over. He ripped his shirt into strips to apply pressure to Tasha's wound. "Call for backup," he ordered, voice booming. But no one moved. The officers, in their shock, stood still, unsure of what to do now that the son of a Delta Force legend was in front of them. Across town at police headquarters, Back at the station, the chief of police received an urgent call. He glanced at the phone, seeing the name of Sergeant Dean, his old friend. "Sir," Sergeant Dean said, his voice shaking, "there's an incident. We just shot a civilian, a woman. But this isn't just anyone." Dean paused. The chief frowned. "What are you talking about? We just shot the mother of Elijah Collins." The air felt different now. Elijah stood over his mother, his military training kicking in as he applied pressure to the bullet wound. The world around him seemed to freeze. The distant sounds of sirens, the growing murmur of bystanders, the officers who had just shot his mother standing a few feet away, frozen in shock. Tasha's breathing was shallow, labored, her skin was pale, and the blood soaking into Elijah's hands made him tremble. His heart raced, but his mind was sharp. He had been in worse situations. But this was his mother. Tasha's eyes fluttered open, a faint whisper escaping her lips. "Elijah, I'm here, Mama," Elijah said softly, his hand gripping hers tightly. "Just hang in there. I need you to stay with me, okay?" Her face contorted in pain, but she nodded. Elijah could feel her weakening with every second. "Don't leave me, Mama," he whispered, his voice hoarse. But his focus didn't waver. He was trained for moments like this. His military experience had taught him how to stay calm under pressure. But this was different. This was personal. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, and soon, another police vehicle screeched to a halt behind the officers who had been involved in the shooting. The new arrivals were more cautious. They approached slowly, but when they saw the situation unfolding, they quickly assessed the gravity of the scene. "Officer Jacobs," a new voice said. "What happened here?" The officer Jacobs didn't answer at first. His face was pale, his body trembling, as if he couldn't believe what had happened. The young rookie cop looked at Elijah, his gaze filled with fear. He hadn't expected to shoot anyone, especially not someone like this. Elijah's reputation preceded him, a soldier who had seen the worst of the worst in combat. "This isn't right," Jacobs muttered, still in disbelief. "You don't get to call the shots here anymore," Elijah growled, glaring at Jacobs, his voice cold and dangerous. "You fired on my mother. You made a mistake and now you're going to own up to it." The sirens grew closer. Elijah's mind raced. He knew that soon, his mother's body would be taken away, but the real fight, the fight for justice, was just beginning. Police headquarters, 10 minutes later. At the police headquarters, the atmosphere was tense. The chief of police paced back and forth in his office, his hands clasped behind his back. The phone call he had just received from Sergeant Dean had rocked him to the core. This wasn't a simple case of excessive force. This was an all-out disaster. The chief had heard of Elijah Collins, of course, Delta Force, a legend, the kind of soldier who made the impossible happen. But the chief never imagined his own officers would cross paths with someone like that. Not like this. "Get me the file on Tasha Williams," the chief barked at one of his subordinates, "and I want everything you can find on her son Elijah Collins. Everything. Now." His tone was sharp, and his eyes were filled with a mixture of frustration and fear. He knew that things were about to escalate, beyond his control. Elijah Collins wasn't a man to be crossed, and now, he would be the one leading the charge for justice. Outside the incident scene, 15 minutes later, by the time additional units arrived, the scene outside the small corner store had transformed. The area was now a makeshift command center. Elijah stood with his arms crossed, staring down the officers involved in the shooting, his anger barely contained. Several witnesses had already been questioned, and a few were now speaking with reporters. "You really did it, didn't you?" Elijah said, his voice cold, his gaze fixed on Officer Jacobs. "You thought you could get away with it. You thought I wouldn't know, but I know what you did." Jacobs couldn't look him in the eye. His shoulders slumped as he stood there, overwhelmed with guilt and confusion. It had all happened too quickly. He didn't know what he had been thinking when he pulled the trigger. "Didn't even give her a chance," Elijah continued, his voice quiet now, but filled with venom. "She was just trying to make it home, and you thought she was a threat." "I didn't mean to," Jacobs began, but his voice trailed off. "You didn't mean to?" Elijah asked incredulously. "Well, that's not good enough. Not when you've stolen someone's life." The officers around them were quiet, unsure of what to do. They had seen Elijah fight on the battlefield, but they were now witnessing something much more personal. This was not a fight for foreign soil. This was a fight for his mother. Inside police headquarters, 20 minutes later, back inside the headquarters, The chief of police sat at his desk, his mind spinning. He knew the public relations nightmare that was about to unfold. The video footage had already hit the news. It wouldn't take long for the press to pick up on the fact that the victim was Elijah Collins's mother. And worse, Elijah Collins was known for his involvement in high-profile military operations. He had an entire community backing him. The chief picked up the phone and dialed a number he had never expected to call. "Get me the mayor," he barked. "We need to get ahead of this before it spirals out of control." Elijah's apartment. 30 minutes later, Elijah sat in his apartment, staring out the window. His mind raced. There was so much to do. His mother was still in the hospital, and though she was stable for now, the weight of what had happened hung heavily over him. He knew this was bigger than just a personal vendetta against the officers who shot his mother. This was about something much larger. This was about the system that allowed things like this to happen over and over again. It needed to change. The phone buzzed on the table. A name flashed across the screen. General Harris. Elijah answered quickly. "We need you to report in," General Harris said. "There's been a situation in Shreveport. We're going to need your help." Elijah's brow furrowed. "What kind of situation?" "You'll be briefed when you arrive, but it's critical. We need you to move quickly." Elijah's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Shreveport, Louisiana, 3:00 p.m. Elijah's military instincts kicked in as soon as he heard the urgency in General Harris's voice. He knew that when the U.S. Army called him into action, things were far from ordinary. The situation wasn't just local anymore. It had escalated to something larger than just his mother's case. The ride to Shreveport was long enough to let the anger settle into something more controlled, more focused. Elijah's phone buzzed constantly as news outlets picked up the footage. Social media exploded with hashtags. The streets of Shreveport were filling with protests, and Elijah knew it wouldn't be long before national outrage spilled into the city. When Elijah arrived at the designated Army briefing location, a military black SUV pulled up outside a nondescript building at the edge of town. The area was quiet, as it usually was with military operations, but the tension was palpable. He walked into the building, and there they were. General Harris, a few high-ranking officers, and a few men in suits that didn't belong in the military world. FBI agent. "Elijah, thank you for coming so quickly." General Harris greeted him. His voice was steady, but there was something beneath it that spoke to the seriousness of what they were about to discuss. "I didn't come for a briefing," Elijah replied, his eyes scanning the room. "I came to make sure my mother gets justice. Now." "We're aware," Harris said, "but we need you to understand the bigger picture. This isn't just a police shooting. It's part of a much larger investigation, one that involves national security." Elijah's eyes narrowed, a dark chill washing over him. "What does that mean? My mother gets shot in cold blood, and you're talking about national security." Harris exhaled deeply. "I didn't want to say this over the phone, but what's happening in Shreveport is connected to something much larger than a few rogue cops. This shooting, it's tied to a larger network we've been monitoring for months, a group that's been targeting black activists, veterans, and political figures." Elijah's heart skipped a beat. "You're telling me that this wasn't just random, that my mother was a target?" "We believe so," General Harris replied. "We've intercepted communications that suggest your mother may have been a part of something they fear. She was, as we've learned, a key figure in organizing black voter drives in the area. More than just a grandmother. The kind of person who could lead others to act, and they knew." Elijah clenched his jaw. The thought of his mother, someone who had just lived a quiet life, being seen as a threat by these shadowy figures sickened him, but it made sense now. The sudden escalation of violence, the way the officers had responded so quickly. They had been following orders. "Who else is involved in this?" Elijah asked. General Harris looked grim. "We believe there's a domestic network of individuals who have infiltrated law enforcement, political circles, and even the military. This isn't just a rogue operation anymore. It's systematic, and it's been growing for years." Elijah processed this in silence. His mind raced. He had fought enemies in foreign lands. But this was a battle on his own turf, a battle for his mother's legacy, for justice, and for a system that had failed too many people like her. "We need your help," General Harris continued, his tone shifting from caution to urgency. "We've been trying to track down the players in this operation, but they're well hidden. We've already received intelligence that the next phase of their plan involves undermining the protests and destabilizing local authorities. They want to use this incident to escalate violence and blame it on your community. Elijah's eyes flashed with fury. You think they want to turn this into a war? It's already happening, Elijah, Harris said. The protests are growing, but they're also feeding into the chaos they want to create. They'll do anything to fuel this fire. We need someone they can't expect, someone they wouldn't dare challenge. I'm listening, Elijah said, his voice steely. General Harris took a deep breath. We need you to infiltrate the protest movement, gain access to the ones pulling the string. We've already got intelligence suggesting that some of these people are military-grade trained, former operators who've gone rogue. They're armed, dangerous, and connected. You're our best chance to stop them. Elijah stared at him. You want me to infiltrate a protest? Use my mother's death as a cover? We don't have a choice, Elijah. This could go national in the next 24 hours. We need intel from the inside. Someone who can get close to those pulling the strings, without them knowing. And if it means using your status as a military hero, so be it. You can stop them before they make this more than just a protest. If we don't act, they'll target more black activists, more families. Elijah's mind raced, but something deep inside him clicked. He knew the stakes. He knew the consequence. This wasn't just a fight for his mother's justice anymore. This was a fight for the future of everyone who had ever been wronged by a system that had never cared. He stood up, his eyes burning with purpose. I'll do it, he said, his voice hard and unwavering. But I need everything. I need resources. I need backup. I won't go in alone. General Harris nodded. You'll have everything we can provide. But once you're in, we can't guarantee safety. You'll be operating on your own, but you're the one with the experience. You're the one who can get inside. Elijah nodded. This wasn't a decision he took lightly, but he knew one thing for sure. This battle was far from over, and the people responsible for his mother's death had no idea what they had just awakened. Elijah stood on the rooftop of the building where they had just finished their briefing. His mind was swirling with everything he had just heard. The deep web of corruption, the hidden operatives, and the shadowy figures pulling the strings behind the scenes. He needed to move fast. The protests were gaining momentum, but so was the threat lurking behind them. The whispers had already started circulating that the people behind the riots weren't activists at all. They were mercenaries, ex-special forces operatives, who had been hired to incite chaos and violence in black communities. They were trying to push a narrative of black-on-black violence to create division and chaos, and Elijah knew without a doubt that his mother's death was just the beginning of their plan. As Elijah looked out over the city, the quiet hum of the protests reached his ears. The anger in the streets was palpable. People were demanding justice, but the lines were becoming blurred, and Elijah had to find a way to cut through the chaos. The next day, 6:30 a.m., protest headquarters, Elijah was suited up in disguise. It was simple but effective, a baseball cap, dark sunglasses, and plain clothes. He blended into the sea of protesters, many of whom didn't even know the true face of what had happened to Mama Martha. He walked through the protest camp, making mental notes. There were the usual protesters, chanting slogans, holding signs and shouting for justice. But among them were others, people whose faces were too serious, their eyes too focused. They weren't here to protest, they were here to manipulate. As he moved deeper into the crowd, he spotted the first suspicious figure, a tall, broad-shouldered man, with a military stance, not a protester, but someone who knew how to keep a low profile. Elijah approached cautiously, trying to blend in while keeping an eye on the man. The way he walked, the way he glanced over his shoulder, it was all too calculated. Elijah could tell he wasn't just part of the crowd, he was part of something more dangerous. Shreveport Police Station, 8:00 a.m. Meanwhile, Officer Jacobs was still sitting in a holding cell. His face was bruised, and his hands were shackled. He had tried to explain himself, but there was nothing he could say. The body camera footage, the witness statements, and the undeniable truth were all against him. He had shot an unarmed woman, a 73-year-old grandmother. The press was relentless, the public was angry, and now, he was being labeled a racist. His phone rang, the prison guard slid it through the bars. Jacobs, the voice on the other end growled, "I've been briefed. You've caused a lot of problems. But we need to talk. Jacob swallowed. Who is? It doesn't matter, the voice responded. You've done your part, but you need to help us finish what we started. The plan is still in motion. Jacobs froze, his mind racing. He knew the man on the other end. They were the ones who had pulled the strings, the ones who had been covertly running operations in the city, using the police as pawns. But now, his mistake had thrown everything off course. Do you understand what's at stake? The voice continued. The protest. It's only the beginning, but we need you to stay in line. It's the only way you get out of this. Jacobs couldn't believe what he was hearing. I don't care about your plan anymore. I just want out. You'll get your chance, but only if you do your job. Remember why we put you on that street, Jacob. It's bigger than just you and me. They were communicating in hushed tones, looking around nervously. Elijah recognized one of them from news footage of a private military contractor he had encountered overseas. Elijah knew that this was the key. These men weren't just involved in the protest. They were trained mercenaries, sent to escalate violence and divide the movement. His heart raced. The pieces were falling into place. Elijah had to act fast. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone, dialing General Harris's number. Harris, I need immediate backup. I've found them. What are you talking about? Harris responded. These aren't activists, Elijah said, his voice low. I've got eyes on men from a private military group. They're manipulating this protest, setting up ambushes, and making the movement look violent. I'm on it, Harris responded. We'll send in a team to track them down. I need your best men. Fast, Elijah replied, his tone unwavering. These guys are good, but they're not as good as I am. Elijah's heart pounded as he continued his surveillance of the group. The mercenaries were moving in and out of a nearby alley, exchanging briefcases, talking to unidentified individuals, and staying in contact with someone on the inside. Elijah knew he didn't have much time. If the police caught wind of this, they would shut it down, and the mercenaries would scatter. He slipped his phone into his pocket and began to tail them again. Every step was measured, every movement calculated. He wasn't just in the fight of his life, he was now in the fight for the soul of the movement. He couldn't let these mercenaries twist what had started as a righteous protest into something that would play into the hands of the corrupt powers in control. The group's leader, a tall man with dark sunglasses, sat in the back of a dimly lit van. His men were out on the streets, causing chaos. The mission was progressing, and it was almost time for the final push. The phone rang. It was Jacobs. I need more time. I've been locked up, but time is a luxury we don't have, Jacobs, the voice said coldly. If you don't act fast, everything is going to fall apart. We need to finish what we started now. But no buts. You've caused enough problems. The army is onto it. We need to shut it down, or we're all exposed. Jacob's voice trembled. I can't. I didn't mean to kill her. I didn't think it would. You should have thought about that before you followed order. The city was on the brink. The protests, fueled by Tasha Williams' death, were growing louder and more intense by the hour. What had started as a call for justice had quickly turned into a national conversation about police brutality, systemic racism, and the forces that tried to keep it all hidden. But now, the true battle was unfolding in the shadows. Elijah stood in the parking garage, surrounded by federal agents and his trusted allies. His military training had prepared him for battle. But this fight wasn't about pulling triggers or making tactical strikes. This was a fight for truth. The truth that could dismantle the corruption festering beneath the surface. The mercenaries were still active on the streets. They were carefully orchestrating the chaos, inciting violence, manipulating the crowd to trigger a response from the police, all while remaining invisible in plain sight. But Elijah had seen enough. The time for waiting was over. He turned to General Harris, his eyes hard and focused. We have to go in now. If we wait any longer, they'll ruin everything we've worked for. General Harris nodded. We've got backup waiting. They're positioned at every intersection. We can sweep the area in minutes. Let's do it. Inside the police station, the officers involved in Tasha's shooting were growing anxious. Officer Jacobs sat in an interrogation room, surrounded by agents. He had been trying to justify his actions, but the truth had already been exposed. The body cam footage, the eyewitness statements, and Elijah's testimony had made one thing clear. He had killed an innocent woman. Jacobs could feel the walls closing in around him. He had made a mistake, but now it was too late. His fate was sealed. But the real question was, Who else was involved? Suddenly a voice came from the hallway. "Get Jacobs to the holding cell," one of the agents said. "We have new intel. The army is making their move. We need to get everyone into position before it all hits the fan." The streets of Shreveport, 4:30 p.m. Elijah and his team moved quickly, moving through the alleyways and streets, closing in on the mercenaries. The crowd had gathered at the protest headquarters, but the men who had been pulling the strings were about to be exposed. The sound of helicopters could be heard in the distance. The army was in the air, covering every escape route. There was no way out for the mercenaries now. Elijah reached the intersection where the mercenaries had set up. He saw them standing near a black van, talking quiet. They didn't notice him approaching. In a flash, Elijah moved, drawing his weapon and signaling to his team to surround them. Hands in the air. "You're under arrest for inciting violence and conspiracy to commit murder." The mercenaries scrambled, reaching for weapons, but they were no match for Elijah's speed. With a few quick movements, the first man went down, his gun clattering to the pavement. The others were restrained in seconds. The leader of the mercenaries, the one Elijah had been watching from a distance, stared out of the van's windows, his eyes narrowing as the sirens grew louder. He knew they were coming, the soldiers, the agents, the army. But he didn't fear them. He had been part of this for years, and he knew how to stay hidden. He was about to make his move when the door of the van suddenly swung open. Elijah stood in the doorway, eyes cold and focused. "You think you can turn this around, huh?" Elijah asked, his voice low. "You think you can manipulate this city like you did the people you left in the dust?" The mercenary leader's lips curled into a sneer. "You don't understand. This isn't just about her death. This is bigger than you, bigger than the protest. This is about something we've been planning for years. You're just too late." Elijah stepped closer, his face inches from the man. "Then I'll make sure you're stopped. You're not going to destroy what we've built. Not today, not ever." He motioned to his team to bring the others. They were shackled, cuffed, and read their rights. The network they had been building, the people they had been paying off, the lives they had tried to ruin. It was all coming down in front of them. Back at the Federal Command Center, the intelligence had been confirmed. The mercenaries were connected to a much larger organization, one with ties to politicians, businessmen, and even military contractors, who had been orchestrating the chaos across the country. The FBI had been gathering evidence for months, but Elijah had just provided the final pieces, the direct link between the mercenaries and the corrupt law enforcement officers who had been part of the operation. The investigation wasn't just going to stop with this one arrest. It was just the beginning. General Harris stood by Elijah, watching the information flood in. "We've got them," Harris said, his voice filled with satisfaction. "No," Elijah replied, his voice unwavering. "We've just made the first move. The real work starts now." Shreveport streets, 7 fear. The truth had been revealed, and the powerful forces that had tried to control the narrative had been exposed. Elijah stood in the center of the crowd, looking around at the faces of the people who had supported him, who had stood with him through this difficult journey. The fight wasn't over, but the first victory had been won. The sound of a loudspeaker echoed through the crowd. "Justice has been served," the voice said, "and we will never stop fighting for what's right." Elijah felt a weight lift from his chest. His mother's death had sparked a revolution, one that would continue for years to come, and he would be at the forefront of